just trying to teach students how to think, or what to think. That's not the point. It's how to find information. But we wanted to teach the why behind. How many of you are incorporating the why of media literacy into your classes? Why is it important to teach media literacy? Why is it important to come to the same set of facts? When we discuss these important social issues, if we can't agree on the facts, how can we have meaningful conversations? If we're bringing false stats, fake information into the classroom of students, how can we have these debates that can turn partisan, that can offend someone's religion unintentionally? How do we do that? So it's the how and why of media literacy, and that's something that we do at the museum. We try to teach how to have these high-stakes conversations and the tools of critical thinking. We think if you put the two together, that helps teach and link students to the responsibility piece of being a good consumer. And again, if you want to share a funny, if you want to share something, we don't want to get in the business of telling you what you should and shouldn't share. But when you're having these important dialogues, you should at least have the same set of information. All right, let me go to the next one. So our efforts to empower consumers, we have everything from teaching how to identify propaganda, and you guys might not see this, but right now Facebook is giving me a large grant to run an ad campaign to identify the seeds of propaganda. They might not have popped up here for you guys. We're just been pushing that out. We help provide tools to evaluate information. 6 steps, that's what my bookmark is up here if anyone wants to take that. We in no way, shape, or form think that every time you look at a piece of information, you're going to go through evidence. What do these facts hold up? Source, who wrote this? Context. What's missing? It's not what we're suggesting, but by teaching these steps, this way of thinking, maybe you'll use one of these tips. Maybe in the back of your mind, you're always starting with, what is the source? Where did this come from? So we're just trying to give that framework. Tools to determine whether or not something is share-worthy. Again, never suggesting you should share or not. We just help you evaluate the quality. Our big goal, as I've kind of alluded to, is leading to civil dialogue. And I know there's some of you in here who teach debate, and debate has its positive points too, but we want to move beyond debate and into dialoguing. And finding common ground, which is hard to do in this polarized state that we're in. We're finding more ways that we're unlike, when we probably have more in common than we have not in common. So that's what we try to focus on. We can go to the next one. Moving from seeking a conflict into complexity, going into these deep conversations and understanding points of view and perspectives. I was at TAMU, Texas A&M, and led a conversation with students on the Kavanaugh hearings and making sure that every perspective potentially in that room was heard, explored, and examined. That's not an easy thing to do when everything that we're seeing from our government, from our politicians, from our news sources, from other adults out there is polarizing, and quite honestly, flinging poo at each other. How do we expect kids to do any better? It is going to happen in the classroom, and that's what we're working on. We also do a case study approach. Sometimes we take students out of the eye and give them a role to make it safe to have these discussions. If they're afraid of attaching, their personal perspectives to an issue, which can make them a target. What's the number one fear of your students? They want being a target of their peers, right? They don't want that, and you can get shouted down and shouted out and targeted, and they don't want that to happen. We have tested these resources literally all over the world. I have 240 countries, users from 240 countries signed up to Museum Ed. I'm leaving here to Boston, to Logan, and heading to Lithuania to do this program, and then to Latvia, and just did it in Dhaka So you guys said that you lost your power last year in DACA, it browns out, you just wait a few minutes till the lights come back. So if the lights went out, I would have been fine. I would have just waited and we would have come back, or we'd have forged ahead with a lighter. Or my cell phone, I guess not flashlights, I'm giving away my age. But we would have moved ahead. So we know there's a passion, there's a thirst, there's a hunger, and we all have the common goals for this. This is just an example of my last resource that we just launched, and this uses the journalism tools to teach, journalistic principles to teach media literacy, the investigative tools. So if you go to newseumed.org, that's all free. Check that out. So hopefully we planted some ideas here today. I wanted to leave time for a couple questions, so I've left about 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, you want to share any thoughts or ideas, this would be the time to do that. You guys are shy. You're not used to being on that side. Yes?
So, what are your opinions on the social media companies using their platform or beginning to ban certain,
fake sites.
In spite of Mark, the Alabama that says that you have the right to free speech even in the face, even if it's private.
Right. This is the slippery slope that we would like to avoid. I think everyone has watched these hearings, and I think we knew that they had to do something eventually, or bigger policies are coming. I personally am in favor of no policy and having better consumers. That being said, some of these sites, especially around sensitive election periods, are truly just out there to wreak havoc. They're fake, sometimes from outside influences, which I'd really like to see some of those, stopped. Though it's not ideal, I kind of agree with some of the ones they've identified. Again, this is why policy doesn't work, because someone is always going to feel like their voice was silenced. And if we feel like our voices are silenced, then that's what leads to the conflict. But some people, if they could just take the money, the earning potential away from these sites, I think they might go away on their own. But we know that's how Facebook makes their money. We know that's their business model. So I'd like to see more of that. But I think there was a lot of call from our government and to do something, and they had to respond. Yes?
Hi, my name is Christy Hammer. I teach at USM. I've taught sociology and education for about 30 years in a couple states. And I'm thinking in higher ed, we've had information literacy standards for about 25, 30 years. I've taught, how to lie with statistics, for about 30 years, and that kind of critical. And I guess what I'm feeling lacking in your argument is how do we go beyond buyer beware? I think it's something beyond just making informed consumer choices, and I'm not sure what it has to do with. Maybe talking about truth and reality and intersubjective verification. How do we get to agreements? And but I think that just seems like it's hard to be a critical analysis, give critical analysis of society when at the same time we're admitting it's all up to the consumer.
Right.
And I think the buyer beware argument. I know the museum is beyond that. I think in some ways. About the ethics, maybe? I'm not sure.
Right, and that is where the responsibility, the personal responsibility comes into it. So we're trying to teach that as well. That's the why, and not just the how on that. But you just hit on something else I think big. There's no math teachers in here, right? Like these are my people, right? The students who are, pre-calc before I get out of high school. I think everyone needs a statistics course. That's what you need. You need to figure out how you're being manipulated. Again, if there is a calculus teacher in here, I'm sorry, it's important. But most students aren't going to need that, right? But they're going to need to know how to combat, statistics. So I do think it's more tools, it's more training, and it's the why. It's the personal responsibility and why this matters. Why do we bother to protect the free press with all of its problems? What, you know, we're now cheering when we see journalists getting beat up. You know, by the very nature of the role of a journalist, to be the unofficial fourth estate, to be our eyes and ears, they're going to be at odds with our government. President Trump is not the first. It goes back to Thomas Jefferson, who ensured a free press. President Obama was very at odds with Fox and wanted them, you know, thrown out of press conferences. Nixon, of course, well, you knew that one. But yeah, this is the very nature. But why do we protect that? And I think that's where our civics folks in here, government, this is what you're teaching. Why do we protect it? Why is this system, you know, worthwhile? Why does it matter that Khashoggi has disappeared, potentially been chopped to pieces? You know, why do should we consider not doing business with Saudi Arabia, or what does that mean? I understand it. These students need to understand what that means, how that impacts us. Why is President Trump even hesitating? Because what that could mean to us economically, but more importantly, you know, why does that matter? Why do we protect that? And I think we've gotten away from some of that. And again, I don't think it's the job necessarily of our education community. They're doing, you know, what they can with the time they have and the resources. But unless you feel that personal responsibility, again, you're absolutely right. Things are not going to change with just by knowing how.
And I have a microphone too, oh, sorry.
Awesome. Do we have one right here?
Is there, yep.
Right here
And back here then, Shane.
Since the profit motive forces tech companies and the journalists to make money, do the numbers change at all when you look at the BBC or PBS when it's publicly funded news sources? Is there a higher trust level? Or can we reclaim some kind of journalistic ethic so that we have a gold standard for a source?
Yeah, there's with the public funded, some of those are have their own set issues, but no, it's a trust issue overall. And I think it's been kind of an active campaign against media that has done that. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the problems that journalists are facing, they have brought on themselves, you know. The gatekeepers of information, there's no doubt. And my humble opinion started with cable news. I agree, that 24/7 cycle, 5 minutes of news and then the rest of it's entertainment. And people are getting their information from there, not realizing that, you know, it's just, you know, a left or right perspective, typically. But no, it's a major trust issue. And a lot of it has to do with the perceived bias, I think. And some of the sloppy reporting. They don't trust journalists. I think if the resources, like John Oliver fans in here? Best example of investigative reporting out there right now, right? You know, what if every newsroom had those type of resources? You know, that used to be the model. Those resources at time to put into investigating a single story. But it's fast-paced, it's sensational, and it's competitive. And I don't think news was meant to be shared on a social platform. It's not based on likes and, you know, shares. It's not. And until we see people going back and paying for subscriptions at papers, I think we're going to see, you know, a lot more sources being lost, unfortunately. I know my son, he tells me about the war in Mosul, and I'm like, how did you know about that? And Snapchat. Yeah, so he's just watching it from there. It's like, yeah, they had a filter, I guess, and they had an editor, and they were sending images from the war, and that's where he wants to get his information. We're going to have to figure out how to respond to that generation. I tried with it. And I know the teachers, I've tried, but what are we going to do? Yes.
Does the museum spend any time or resources with the history of fake news?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that's terribly important.
We do, and we build that into some of our presentations. I even have some of it in some of my others, but I assume that this group here would know a lot of it. So is there anything in particular that you think I should be including?
I was just thinking of the Kennedy Museum in Dallas, Texas, which had a whole wing full of fake news about conspiracy theories. It was fascinating. And it was the type of thing you see on the internet now, but it was in the form of pamphlets and whatnot, newspapers. I mean, they printed newspapers for crazy theories. And I think that it could allay some of our fears as teachers to delve into that in the classroom for a day or two, to show kids it's not new. And
it's not new. The platform's new, you're right. If you go back a couple, and I don't know if you remember, again, there, forward, yeah. This is our approach, our case study approach, and we do this with fake news as well. We always have a historical connection to a contemporary issue to show just that, that this is not new, these issues. People want us to believe that. That's a propaganda technique a lot of times. No, but you're absolutely right. And sometimes rooting it with a historical connection can take away the issues with discussing that contemporary issue today. It makes it more safe to discuss it when you look at it in history, than look at the issue today. You know, how many of you were afraid to teach about the presidential election in your classroom? Yeah, exactly. So you're going to go back and teach through history. If we can, again, come to the same set of facts, then it would be easier to have these discussions and dialogue and not debate your candidate, but dialogue about perspectives, because everyone has a valid perspective, and just finding that common ground is important. But that's great. If you have any others, good ones, email me. But they're sprinkled throughout some of our lessons. And just so you know, that's the next big collection I'm pitching is propaganda. And I've got a couple donors who are really interested in pitching it. So you'll see even more of that if it works. And again, I'm just me working for you, and we'll push them out. I'll let you know. Do we have other questions?
Over here.
Okay.
Yes, I had a question that came up in our classroom a number of years ago. There was NBC News fired a reporter, a long-term reporter of high reputation, for claiming on air that he was closer to a military operation than he actually was. And our question was, what was the motivation of that reporter? Was it personal? Was he being pushed by NBC, the corporation itself? So do we see a push for ratings and trying to get a grab of that 24-hour news cycle? Or do we see, or is it a combination of journalists trying to increase their prestige within the profession?
I think you hit on it right there. It's a combination of internal and external factors. But all of those factors are what are leading to this mistrust in journalists. We had, you know how many exhibits we had that at the museum that highlighted Brian Williams? So we had to go in and scrub and work on that because that put a major, black eye on it. But they are being pushed to have a more interesting, a more sensational story. We know that it's all about the storytelling, and who's going to want to stick with the story of just facts a lot. That's where the consumers, we have to be more responsible. We want to be entertained along the way. And we say we want just the facts, give me just the news, the facts, but we don't stay tuned. Now they tell you how long it's going to take you to read something. You only have to commit 2 minutes to this, right? You only have to commit, 5 minutes. Oh, I don't have 5 minutes. I can't read that news story, so it's a little bit of both, but that's the type of stuff that's really damaging the reputation of the hardworking journalists out there. And all of you have your trusted source, right? We like to say the media today, but there are trusted sources out there we can use. I tell my participants, I'm like, how many of you research where you're going to get your hair cut? Ladies, anyone? How many? Maybe the men. You research. I'm going to look like a Q-tip if I don't get the right person. I was like, just put that much energy and effort into researching your news sources. Take one day, go through the news sources, read the ratings, know who they are, go to the About page, figure it out, and those are your go-to sources. So that way that can save you time in the end. But even those can sometimes make terrible mistakes. You see the memes and the jokes too about the weather reporters, with the reporting in the terrible storms. Yeah, people I think are getting a little bit fed up with those tactics, and maybe they're not going to work for long. Let's hope.
Could you comment on junk news and fake news?
Right. So junk news refers to all of the problematic information that comes out. That's bias, that's sloppy reporting, that's negative news, where fake news is really just, it's the lies. But we see now that President Trump and now other politicians, they're glomming onto this term. And this was a Craig Silverman, a BuzzFeed term that was created, this fake news term. It actually started there. It's just been popularized by President Trump. They're trying to lump in a lot of different definitions into that. And that's what we have to fix, that terminology. Bias is not fake. You need to be able to identify what is biased and the perspective of that. It's really important. Some of our resources online help students do that. We have some videos in the new Fact Finder, but it's not fake. And understanding that nuance. I know a lot of academics won't even say fake news. And they're like, but that's what people know. And that's where you start. You start with that term and then you peel back the layers. Again, I travel all over the world. People are like, so what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to do, a presentation on disinformation. Huh? I'm like, misinformation. Media literacy. What's that? Oh, fake news. Oh yeah, we got a problem there. That's the term that people recognize. That's why 30 years academics have been studying. They've been, is it news literacy, media literacy, information? They have been studying